Shabbat Shalom. Good morning, everyone. I am Rabbi Jenny Greenspan here at Congregation Beth-El Zedek. I'm doing our weekly Shabbat morning Torah Talk. It's glad to see some gathering already. This morning we will be reading from Parashat Shemini, which means eighth. It's the eighth day after the tabernacle was built. Is the opening verses of this Torah portion. But for now, I'll say Shabbat Shalom. Good morning. Welcome to the Seagulls. Shabbat Shalom. Good morning, Alex Binder and Phyllis Luger. To James Roth, Michael Kahn. Shabbat Shalom. So good to see everybody joining already. As usual, if you would like a PDF of the Etz Chaim Chumash of this week's Torah portion, you can go to bez613.org, navigate over to the Shabbat, virtual Shabbat resources, and scroll down to the resources for Torah Talk, where there will be a link that says Etz Chaim, where you will have a PDF of this morning's Torah portion available to you from the Etz Chaim Chumash, or you can grab your own physical Etz Chaim. And actually today I'm going to be a little bit more on the theme of the Torah portion, more so than a particular verse. So if you don't want to grab anything to follow along and would prefer to just hang and listen, that is also fine. But also some more greetings. Shabbat Shalom. Good morning. I see I've got Marty Lip and Jody Zucker, Alan Hamburger. I see the Sclairs are here, and Jim Hammonds. Shabbat Shalom. So good to see everybody from all over our area, even up to Muncie. And Shabbat Shalom. Welcome. And I'm glad we're all here. So as I mentioned, this morning's Torah portion is Shemini. Cheryl Tuf, good to see you too. Shabbat Shalom. Welcome, Cheryl. So this morning's Torah portion is Shemini, which means the eighth, referring to the eighth day after the tabernacle was built. Right now we're in this finishing up the project that was the end of the book of Exodus, was building the tabernacle, the Mishkan, that would follow the Israelites around the desert and give them a place to do their worship and give them a place to do their sacrifices. And as the beginning of Leviticus took over, we've started seeing a bit more of how life inside that should go. One thing I found interesting in looking at the eighth day is eighth day. A week is 7 days, and often if we talk about the eighth day, that's when we mean beyond and into the future. Baby boys, Brit Milah, circumcision, is welcomed in on the eighth day of his life, because it's a week, and into beyond for the rest of his life. And here we have the eighth day of our tabernacle, sort of an interesting little thing I've noticed and heard looking at the eighth day. And that this should carry forward into our future. But much of this week's portion is taken up by the laws of how the Levites should behave inside the tabernacle, how they should give, and the Kohanim, how they should give the sacrifices, where they should eat, what they should eat, and then we get the in chapter 11, which is where I'm going to look almost closely, but not as specifically on a particular verse this week, where we get the laws of which animals are considered kosher and which animals are not considered kosher, which animals are fit for us to consume, and which are not. So I want us to, thinking about kashrut, I want to actually take one step back, and share as something a friend of mine mentioned is an anecdote recently. So this friend of mine had a baby about 10 months ago. So she has a new little son running around her home. Well, he's not running yet, but and she said one thing that has become irksome to her is the number of times she has heard something along the lines of, "Wow, after your baby, you've gotten your body back." In reference to looking at how her body has readapted to look more similar to what it looked like prior to her pregnancy with her son. And it got me thinking about how much in our society energy and thought is put into bodies, into what we look like. The vast majority of human beings in our culture, regardless of age, regardless of gender, have had at some point in their lives some feeling of dissatisfaction around their body, whether they thought their body was too tall or too short, too big or too small, too weak or too muscular. Most people have had some kind of feeling at some point that their body was wrong in some way. And billions of dollars are spent every year on equipment and on food and on suggestions of food in order for us to adapt our bodies, our physical bodies. And we say to women who've recently given birth, and we say to a 30-year-old woman who is raising her son, wow, you have your body back. There's a judgment of bodies and a constant look at bodies. And yet, so often, the statement we make to that person is not, what a miracle your body did to bring this little boy into the world. Those aren't what we say to my friend. And it's not what many of us end up finding ourselves saying to young women after they've given birth. And that's just one example of the kinds of statements that people hear about bodies. Just one that happens to be close to me for a friend at the moment. And so much money is spent on how we should eat to affect what our bodies look like. And our diets in our culture end up being filtered through, what might this do to my body? Am I allowed to have a particular treat food? Have I had enough vegetable to allow myself this? We have constant analysis of our foods, thinking about how it will affect our physical bodies. And I think that kashrut, a system of what and how and when we should eat, a system that points to particular animals as animals that are acceptable for eating and some that are not, a system that in its most extreme has particular timing of when we can eat particular meats versus dairy and on what dishes and where were they prepared and how was that meat slaughtered. We have a huge amount of our energy in Jewish literature looking at kashrut is on the very food itself, but it's never about the body. Most of the time in our culture, when we think about our diet, we're thinking about the body and how it'll affect the body. Will it make my body bigger or smaller? Will it increase my body's ability to be athletic or strong? But it's rarely about spirituality. If you look at chapter 11 of Leviticus, which in our Etz Chaim Chumash begins on page 636 and continues through the end of this Torah portion, which just goes on for several pages in our Etz Chaim through 642, we see so much about what can and can't and what's pure and impure. It's not about how our bodies will be affected. If we zoom into verse 44 on page 642, it says, "For I am the Lord your God, you shall sanctify yourselves and be holy." Here at the end of a list of what we should eat is the suggestion that this is a form of sanctification. That thinking about our food is a form of sanctification. It shifts. For me, this means that kashrut is an opportunity to shift the focus on my food from how will it affect my body to how will it affect my spirit. It shifts the focus from what can I eat for the sake of my body to how can I nourish my body with food, because I do need nourishing food as a body, to how do I remember that the purpose of that body is holiness? How do I remember that my goal in taking care of my body is not for my body to look a certain way, but rather for my body to be healthy enough for me to do what I need to do in this world, for me to set out and listen for my role in partnering with God to make this world a better place. Kashrut can offer the opportunity to shift from I want to change my body to I want to allow my body to be the miracle that it is. I have a friend who said that keeping kosher is a way to remind himself that he's Jewish every time he sits down to eat, because he has to think about it. It's a way of putting his mind into the system. It's as a way of holding on to the spirit of his Judaism. So I hope this morning, as you read through the Torah portion, if you'd like to read through the particulars, there are some nitty-gritty details in there. You are more than welcome to read through this PDF of our Torah portion. But I wonder if you can look at it from a frame of, I am not doing this and not thinking about my foods in ways that will be about my physical health, but about my spiritual health. Can I remember each time I nourish my body that I do so that I can be the most connected and most in tune with myself and my mind and my spirit as I would need to be. This week, as we move forward into our week, we'll say Shabbat Shalom, and I hope that you have a week of nourishment, a week of good, enjoyable, tasty foods, and a week of thinking about our food as a way to nourish the miracles that our bodies are, rather than being in a constant combat with our bodies. Let's say Shabbat Shalom. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you will join on our live stream for our service beginning at 10 o'clock. You just go to the Be-Easy 613 website and click the Watch Live to join me and Rabbi Dennis in the chapel at 10 o'clock. We hope to see you soon, and Shabbat Shalom. Thank you so much for joining me.